I also want to thank everyone for coming out tonight, and for everyone who's participating in the debate. Ironically, if it were 4 years ago right now, I would be sitting on that side of the table. I grew up Christian, and I became born again when I was in high school. I was an evangelical all the way through most of my undergrad, and only in the past few years have I ended up leaving the church. And I did that not because I had any particular axe to grind or because there was something I didn't quite like about my upbringing. It was something that was wonderful to me, it was something I held dear, and something that's culturally important for me today. But at the same time, I'm deeply committed to the question of what is true and what pertains best to our understanding of reality and to what we see around us in the day-to-day. And what I want to argue, and what I hope will become apparent during this debate, is that a secular understanding of this world, a world that does not function with a God who jumps in and out of time and space whenever he pleases, and a world that does not start out as crippled and broken and move towards some kind of a wholeness eventually. That's not the world I see around me, and I want to argue that's not the world in which we live. And I think all of us who are here at the table up here tonight are willing to say that it is the existence of God, not just pragmatic reasons for believing in God, that are most important. And I think that it's very clear from the arguments from both sides that we're convinced that there's an importance to trying to decide exactly how things are. And I want to point out that Ben tried to give some sort of a grounding for trying to see how things are and how we're supposed to operate. Because we all make assumptions and we all make mistakes and we all have to be tested. And in that time, we find out that we're wrong, that we've come to wrong conclusions, that we've made false assumptions. But as human beings, we have the ability to learn from that, to mature, to move on, and to become better people. And I think Ben was willing to put out a framework with which to try to approach this, to try to approach it from, in most cases, working out through a scientific process, in which we try to have hypotheses, we try to gather information, we draw conclusions based on our experience and the evidence, and we're open to being wrong based on the evidence that's around us. And that when there's good evidence, we can draw deeper conclusions from that, and when we're on shakier evidence, we have to leave our assumptions a little bit more open. And I think what we have to do tonight is try to really weigh out exactly where these two sides are putting their evidence and where we see the balance of evidence actually swaying. And I want to argue that the most convincing evidence so far tonight and over the course of tonight will be in the direction that there is no need to see a God in this world for this world to make sense. And because of that, because I don't see that need in the world around us today, then there are not good reasons to believe in a God. No claim that's built just on a preferability or a beauty of an idea should be counted as true. A thing can be beautiful, a thing can sound interesting, a thing can seem wonderful, but it may not be true. I mean, the music of the spheres is this idea that sounds so wonderful and it's so perfect, and yet that perfection was one of the problems that we found out we had to operate against. And this idea that human beings were created with some kind of a divine purpose and by a divine hand may sound really beautiful. It may give you a sense when you're going to bed at night that you have a special purpose in this world, that you are so different from any animal that you see on your walking to class, and that you have a place in this world and the next. But that beauty is not the only beauty you can find in the world. And if that beauty is not true, then that beauty has to be rejected at the same time. I never left the church because I thought that the Christian message was not a beautiful message. It is. But at the same time, the question is really whether it's true and whether we have those reasons to believe in a God. And as Ben pointed out, we have a world which is beautiful in and of itself. As Carl Sagan talked about, we are star stuff that gets to contemplate star stuff, which is an extraordinary thing. And we aren't extraordinary just based on a sense of being given that extraordinariness. Our lives are not meaningful because of the sense that we have been given that meaning. There's something, I think, very dehumanizing, very, very debasing in that idea that you or I could not be able to have a life of true meaning and of true purpose, should we not base it on a theistic understanding. And especially within the Christian context, which so often is based on this idea that there is an eternal life, an eternal damnation or eternal reward that is based on the other side of this life. That puts life in a perspective that, were it true, would be important for us to know, because then it would change the way that we live our lives in the here and now. But with so little evidence, with such shaky scriptural grounds, with such shaky historical facts, with such bad philosophy, and with all of these different points that do not make us naturally think of a immortal soul, then it is actually an ethical imperative that we reject and we do not operate with an assumption of an afterlife, because we can't assume that it's there. If we're assuming that it's there, and we base our life off of that, to find out that that was wrong in any way would be to radically change what it means to be a human being. And what we can do in those times when we have to do things like cure AIDS, when we have to do things like feed the hungry, all of those things, when put on the time scale of a secular understanding, where I am born and I die, and there is no guarantee of anything after that, puts so much more urgency and so much more of a need for justice in our here and now than a Christian worldview would ever claim.
We'll now move to the rebuttal part of our debate, and so each of our participants will have a short time to respond to the arguments that they have heard tonight, and then after that we'll open it up to Q&A.
We're going to move it. Follow it.
Do you want that up?
Oh yeah, no, you guys wanted that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Do you need me to hold on to?
Oh, I didn't realize there was nothing. There you go. Okay. So I think Dan brought up the point and seems to be bringing up the point, correct me if I'm mistaken, that science seems to be in conflict with religion. Now, I personally disagree emphatically. As you heard, I am a physics major. I hope to go into grad school in physics and research. And there are many before me, and I'm sure there will many be, who will come after me, who will be Christians and who will want to go into the hard sciences. And I think the reason we do that is because we don't think that science contradicts God. And, when I think back about, when you look back, into the history of the world, what I want to point out is that Christianity and I think monotheism in general actually promoted the hard sciences, because prior to a belief in the one true God, when you have a pantheon of God, capricious gods who just did their whims and their fancies, they just killed, they helped one human one day and decided to help someone else the other day, there was absolutely no reason to believe that the natural world could be explained. When you look at the natural world, that's a fairly chaotic place. With air resistance and all, you imagine that you push something, you would never imagine that that thing is just going to keep going at free space. But it does. But my point is that if you have a worldview in the past that there were many capricious gods, there is no reason why you should find them true. There's no reason why truth exists, but we only have the conception of truth because monotheism came into the picture. Because we believe that there was a one true God who created things, who made them into an ordered universe, who governs them with transcendental ordered laws that we can find, precisely because we can, as Ben said, carry out repeated experiments. And the other thing that I want to point out is that, Ben seems to think that science can provide us all answers. And that is kind of true in some ways, in the physical sense, but it only holds, of course, for phenomena that are repeatable. For us to verify that our experiment is true, we do many experiments independently, and we verify the results of our hypothesis. But consider a miracle. How do you define a miracle? Well, a miracle is something which you define, which is extremely rare and probably not very repeatable. right? Because if it's very rare, you hardly expect it to be a miracle. If it's very rare, that's how you define a miracle. And so science by its nature cannot really investigate how one miracle occurs. And, I think Ben also pointed out the fact that science, there were a lot of church officials who were against the advancement of science. And I agree that's true. It's a sad thing, but it's true. But I would point to a verse in 1 Timothy where Apostle Paul says to Timothy in chapter 6, verse 20 and 21, he says to Timothy, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith. And so you see, Christianity in itself is not against science. Paul expressly tells Timothy that avoid all of that. Don't go against science. That's not what God is about. We believe that nature is one revelation of God, and Scripture is another revelation from God. And finally, I guess I want to ask a question, Ben, for you, because I think you said, at the end that you don't think that humans have inherent human dignity, that there's no inherent human dignity.
I don't agree with that. I disagree with the Christian presumption that they have the more high ground on human dignity.
So you do believe that humans have inherent human dignity?
Absolutely.
Could I ask why?
I believe I can have human dignity because I want to have human dignity. This is a larger discussion about humanistic morality, which I'm happy to have. But the fact that we are evolved with empathy, I feel when you get hurt, and that hurts me. And I have a desire to not suffer. So I don't want to suffer. I don't want to live in a world where other people suffer. I try to maximize human well-being.
Right. So you were saying that we should, we have a community.
This will be your last question, then you have to concede the floor.
Okay. So okay, I'll try to have to pick my last question properly. Well, if that's the case, I can understand that empathy will be important, but I guess then my last and final question is, what stops you when it comes down to survival, when there are two communities when you have an overpopulation situation and you need to get rid of people, or some other people are trying to kill you because there are not enough resources, and people have to kill each other to survive, then would you think that, killing them before they kill you is morally justified?
Self-defense is a principle or under a hypothetical apocalyptic situation? That is a serious question.
No, that's fine. What I'm saying is, do you think that a preemptive strike would be morally justifiable?
Sometimes.
Thank you, Jenny. You guys concede the floor. Ben, would you like to take over?